Hey, I'm back with another video. This time I want to discuss about how you can make speed flying as safe as possible, reducing the risk of getting injured or even dying by a lot. As always, you can activate subtitles if needed. Lately, due to social media and better accessibility to the sport with newer speed wings and parakites, more and more people are deciding to give speed flying a try. And I've been asked more frequently about how dangerous speed flying really is. And my answer is always the same. It's as safe as you make it. First of all, I don't want to downplay the risks of speed flying. It's an extreme sport and with that it brings risks. Especially if you're a beginner, I believe it's more dangerous than you might think. Only once you get good at it and learn what to avoid and which limits you should not push, it becomes safer and in my opinion more than manageable. In the beginning, you don't know your wing yet, you don't know how much it dives out of a turn, you don't know how fast it gets when building up energy, and you're still not ready for all the unexpected situations that might happen during a flight where fast inputs and muscle memory are required. The learning curve is something that can't be skipped, which is why taking your time when downsizing to smaller wings is the safest choice. Here's a short version of the scenarios to avoid in order to make the sport safer. Avoid barrel rolls close to the ground. Don't make turns larger than 90 degrees when landing. Avoid cliff launches. Don't downsize too quickly. By doing so, your chances of dying in the sport are massively reduced. Proximity flying is still, at least for me and probably for most pilots, the most rewarding part. And at the same time, with the latest speed wings and especially parakites, it has become much easier and safer than ever before. On the other hand, here are some things that you should do to reduce the risk of injury or death. Use an airbag protection under your butt, use an emergency parachute, master your wing and its size before rushing into a smaller one. The good old days of competing with your friends to see who flies the smallest wings are over. Today's wings are safer and bring more performance with it. There's no need to fly 6 to 9 meter wings anymore if you're not a pro and want to risk everything for the sport, especially with the new parakites. I guarantee you can have a lot of fun with a 30 meter or even a 15 meter parakite too. Even with a 50 meter line, you can swoop it longer at the landing than with any 11 meter normal speed wing and maybe even a 9 meter wing. Most clips you saw in the background are from flying a line 13 and 15 at a relatively low wing load of 75 kilograms. Now I want to talk more in detail about how you can make speed flying safer with the points I mentioned earlier. Let's start with the famous barrel roll. When practicing barrel rolls, always ensure you're in calm air, with plenty of altitude and importantly, wearing an emergency parachute. Once you're comfortable with making barrels, they are generally safe at high altitudes as long as you know what you're doing and have a plan B, which is the emergency parachute. However, things change drastically when performing barrel rolls close to the ground. As I mentioned earlier, speed flying is as safe as you make it. If you choose to push the limits of the sport and perform tricky maneuvers that elevate the risk of crashing drastically, it's your choice. But if your goal is to significantly reduce the risk of accidents or death, don't even think about practicing barrel rolls near the ground. Yes, there are plenty of skilled athletes and talents out there on social media these days who perform them, but that doesn't make it less dangerous or well suited for everyone. Many things can go wrong during a barrel roll at low altitudes, from unexpected turbulences to misjudgments. You need to know your wing perfectly, and that takes time, something you don't get by just flying 50 times a year. If you don't maintain the same energy level before initiating a barrel roll, your sink rate will be different each time. If you initiate a roll with less energy, you lose more altitude, and risk of stalling the wing increases. The fact that the amount of altitude lost during each barrel roll isn't consistent is a strong reason why you need to understand your wing inside and out. You have zero space for errors. Accidents often happen during landing. To reduce the risk of crashing significantly, avoid coming in from a turn greater than 90 degrees. The spectacular swoops you see from the experienced speed flying pilots aren't realistic for most people, especially if you rush them. It's always safer not to overdo it.
Socks and grab your Crocs. We're about to get wet on this ride. Power
full 100% capacity.
If you're coming in from a 180-degree turn or worse a 360-degree turn, you don't have room for errors and the possibility of misjudging altitude increases by a lot. When you first start making turns, even just 90 degree, it's normal to occasionally misjudge altitude and make turns too low. We all do it. The key is to recognize it early and know how to safely end your dive. The challenge for beginners is recognizing when you're too low, which takes time. That's one reason why you should never rush your learning curve. If you realize too late that you are too low in a turn and are about to hit the ground, it's generally better to switch from rear risers to the brakes. By pulling the brakes, you create more drag, which helps bringing your wing back above you quickly, enabling you to end the dive safely. Since you're in a high speed turn, your wing can handle a lot of brake input without stalling. If you don't aim for extreme swoops, coming out of a 90-degree turn is far safer. You can still be the cool guy during landings without overdoing it. Today, parakites are much more efficient when it comes to flaring at the landing. There is no need to force extreme turns. A 50-meter line, for example, will flare longer after just a 90-degree turn than any other 11-meter speed wing ever could. It's generally safer to have a longer takeoff distance for running. This gives you a larger safety margin to adjust or abort the launch if something feels wrong with your wing. When launching from a cliff, the amount of altitude you lose immediately after varies depending on several factors. One is wind conditions. In strong winds, your wing will start flying sooner, but with no wind or even slight tailwind, you lose more altitude compared to previous takeoffs from the same cliff. That's what happened in this clip. Another factor is your speed. The more speed you can gather before launching, the sooner your wing will start flying. Beside the risk of sudden altitude loss after a cliff launch, other dangers are related to your glider. If something goes wrong, like a stall or a small collapse from turbulence or misinputs right in front of the cliff, there's a high chance you'll fall off the cliff without the wing recovering. In normal takeoffs, you can still abort, or you will at least just slide down the slope rather than falling into a free fall.
Oh god! Oh god! Oh god! I'm okay. Whew.
Don't rush downsizing. A lot of flying accidents happen due to information overload when things start to go wrong. You get used to every smaller wing over time, but simply being able to fly it isn't the goal. If you're downsizing too quickly and find yourself in a situation that requires a quick reaction, your flying experience will truly be tested. You can't skip this process, because when things go wrong, they happen quickly, and every fraction of a second you lose is a higher chance of injury or dying. Take this video as an example. The pilot realized quickly that he probably wasn't able to make the turn in time by staying just on the rear risers. Because of his experience and fast thinking reactions, he managed to switch to the brakes to make a sharper turn. If you downsize too quickly and find yourself in a situation like that, chances are high that because of an information overload and a too less trained muscle memory, you will not be able to react the right way in time. As already mentioned, with modern parakites you don't need to fly 8 or 9 meter wings anymore. You can have a lot of fun with 13 or 15 meter parakites too, and they are crazy fast for their size. This might sound obvious to many, but it's worth addressing, especially with the new parakites. Last summer alone, I've seen or heard about at least 10 accidents or near crashes because of this. This isn't just a concern for beginners, but also for more experienced pilots, especially those transitioning from smaller 8-9 meter wings to a bigger parakite. Parakites have a much larger wingspan than traditional speed wings. For instance, the Mirage 11 has a wingspan of 6.3 meters, the Line 13 of 7.3 meters and the Moustache 13 of 8.4 meters. This larger wingspan can become an issue if you used to not worry about wingtips while making tight turns or flying in terrain where you're surrounded by obstacles or trees. As you can see in this clip, just by making a larger turn to stay low on the ground, the wingtip touched the terrain, which immediately after led to a crash. Flying through tight spaces with obstacles on either side. While the line might be more forgiving and super stable even if one air gets dragged in, it's still something to be cautious about, because it might pull you towards that direction if you don't react in time. In the heat of the moment, you might get overwhelmed with information and it becomes easy to forget about your rider wingspan. You might might get too close to obstacles faster than you think, which can lead to a loss of control. Reacting quickly is key in these situations, otherwise you will be dragged in the direction where the wingtip touched the obstacle. As you can see in this clip, where the pilot didn't counter-steer and just followed the direction the wing was pulling him. If you're used to a 9-meter Mirage with a wingspan of 5.8 meters and suddenly try a 13 Moustache, which is the smallest size available, with a 2.6 meter wider wingspan of 8.4 meters, you'll need to adjust your flying style, or at least be aware of this. Now let's talk more in detail about a controversial topic, the use of an airbag and an emergency parachute. Most speed flyers don't use either of them. When you're first introduced to the sport by your friends or see pilots on social media, you might be influenced by that. Especially people from skydiving think they don't need an airbag because they don't use one in skydiving either. But keep in mind that while speed flying we are sitting. If you crash mainly on your butt, which compresses your spine. Skydivers are standing when swooping at the landing, and they often break their legs and hips, but it's less common for them to injure their backs. I opened a discussion in a speed flying group over a year ago where we discussed exactly this. Why 90% of speed flyers don't wear protection. The results were as follows. Practically everyone agreed that we need more protection. Too many accidents are happening and many of them are very severe. Protection will always reduce injury, at least a little, but it can also prevent them completely depending on the crash. In the background you're seeing clips of accidents where I think an airbag would have avoided completely or at least reduced the injuries by a lot. There's no doubt about it, an airbag is a smart choice, not only for beginners, but especially for them it should be a must-have. So, why are so few speed flyers using one? From the discussion from that post, the following problems emerged. A lot of pilots still believe airbags don't help, but that's simply not true. Yes, if you crash with 100 km per hour into a wall or a tree, it won't help. But most accidents don't happen like that. When misjudging altitude while landing, for example, which is one of the scenarios where a lot of accidents happen, or in all the situations you saw in the videos in the background, an airbag would have helped most of the times. Speed flying companies don't offer smart and useful solutions for wearing an airbag. Most speed flying harnesses just have an optional airbag, which is essentially a giant potato sack with which you will look like a dumbass. After a while, it just gets annoying. Even if most people don't admit it, I'm sure this is something that influences the decision for many, even if subconsciously. Another problem with most of the current available airbags is, because of that bad design, it also adds a lot of drag, reducing your max glide and interfering with your proximity flying. Once you get better at it, your giant airbag will constantly touch the ground. And we need a solution for that. We should have the option of being able to use a more aerodynamic airbag with a slippery surface to disperse energy better into horizontal speed. I came up with a solution for myself by adding a few stitches to the Flare Contour airbag so it fits with the Fusion harness and has a lower volume, resulting in better aerodynamics and less thickness. Many people have asked me about that airbag or messaged me after seeing it in one of my videos. Even Benny from Speed Flying School adopted that strategy last summer by modifying the Contour airbags for his students. This shows that people actually want to fly safer. It's finally time to recognize the need for better options. There's a big desire for many pilots to have an aerodynamic airbag that doesn't interfere much with proximity flying, but still enhances safety. Maybe in future we'll see more support in developing a good, useful and more aerodynamic airbag in speed flying too, who knows. I gotta admit, there probably won't be many scenarios where you could use one, because we are speed flyers and we fly close to the ground, so the parachute wouldn't even have the time to open itself. But be honest with yourself, how often do you really fly low from beginning to the end? Don't you ever fly out high, maybe because it got turbulent or because you need to fly out higher in the last part of a line to reach the landing area? It probably depends on the terrain you're flying, but I can only speak about myself and especially about speed flying here at Kronplatz. I get asked so many times why I fly with an emergency parachute, since it's useless in speed flying. There are scenarios where it would be completely useless, like when flying on the south side of Kronplatz where you're close to the terrain from beginning to the end. But when flying the classic North line, most pilots start flying out higher after about halfway through the slope when they reach the restaurant. The chances of getting a collapse with a speed wing are low, but never zero. Having a plan B is never a bad idea. In the background you can see a video where the emergency parachute saved a pilot on his speed wing. There are many scenarios that can happen, such as launching with a knot, like like in this video, stalling your wing during a barrel roll, getting a collapse, or even creating a collapse by overreacting when entering turbulent air, which could involve misjudging weather conditions or encountering a strong thermal, which is common on sunny days. But just having one is not enough. You need also to learn how and when to use it. I know of one specific case where a pilot made a barrel roll with a line and went into spiral afterwards, crashing to the ground, resulting in severe injuries and paraplegia. This pilot had an emergency parachute and enough altitude to throw it, but for some reason didn't deploy it. In a scenario like this one, that emergency parachute could be the last thing that would save your life. Today, there's literally no excuse for not bringing one. Just look at how small they've gotten. You can fit one inside your helmet when packing your backpack and it weighs only 800 grams. Just keep in mind that an emergency parachute should be repacked at least once a year to guarantee the fastest opening, otherwise the material could stick together, making it slower to deploy. Another general rule is that an emergency parachute should be replaced after 10 years, no matter if it's been used or not. Finally, take the time to learn your wing, what each system, trimmers, brake and rear riser steering does to your wing, especially with the angle of attack and the drag. If you're not sure what I mean, I highly recommend watching my video explaining the differences between flying with rear risers and brakes. You find the link in the description. But if you find yourself in a situation where an impact is inevitable or you're too deep in a dive to recover in time, it's almost always better to switch from rear risers to brakes. Less drag caused with the rear riser piloting is beneficial for proximity flying, but drag becomes your friend when you need to stop and exit a dive. Pulling the brakes creates the most drag, which will bring your wing back above you and help you end the dive more quickly. Likewise, before an imminent crash, switching to the brakes will minimize your impact speed, which won't happen with just pulling the rear risers. That was it. Take in mind that I'm not an instructor. The intention of this video is not to provide a guide on how to speed fly, as this should only be done under certified instruction. Instead, my goal is to share my personal experience along with the knowledge from the global speed flying community and to gather the most essential information on making the sport as safe as possible together all in one place. This will allow you to gain a better insight if you're already a pilot, but it will never replace a professional instruction. If you're looking for other speed flying guides and tips, such as a comparison between the most important speed wings, the difference between flying with rear risers or brakes, a full guide on how to speed fly at Kronplatz or more, I'll leave you the links in the description. See you next time, have fun and fly safe.